would never have been appropriate for the rulers. He sits cross-legged, and also he's shown with not as tight of a stomach as Menkaure has over there. So that's something that would have never been appropriate for artists to portray in royalty, but with figures that were a little bit of a lower class, that would be okay with. And it was actually seen as kind of a sign of respect for these figures, because with that little tummy that he has, it actually shows his prosperity and how he could afford to get food just from his wealthy profession. So next, we'll look at Old Kingdom paintings. And a lot of these were seen on tombs. This instance, we have King T, or T watching a hippopotamus hunt, and this was located in the tomb of T, or in his mastaba. And this shows T in the same composite arrangement that we saw in King Narmer. So he's shown with his torso frontal, his eyes frontal, and then with his body, or with his arms, legs, and head all facing profile towards the side. Depictions of nature in Egyptian painting. Up towards the top, we see some animals in the papyrus reeds, and then along the bottom, there's some ocean animals in the river. And this theme of T hunting is actually symbolic, again, to represent his power, because by hunting these animals, both in the ocean and in the reeds, he was imposing order. So again, creating that order and doing kind of his part to impose order on nature. And he's symbolically standing over the animals and over the river, again, as a sign of his power. We also see that hierarchy of scale that we saw in King Narmer's palette, with T being the largest figure in the painting, and then his attendants being smaller than him as well. Now, in the Middle Kingdom, the artwork resembled that of the Old Kingdom with that same frontal style. However, they do have some slight changes that you can look at if you really look at it closely. With this fragmentary head of Sensteret III on the left, we see a little slight hint of emotion in there, and some sense of wear and a little bit of his time that he spent as a ruler. So we get to see kind of what he has accomplished by the artist showing some signs of wear in his face. Also in the squatting mound, the right-hand side, you can see just a little hint of emotion coming out. So it's really interesting that you get to see these people kind of coming to life a little bit more in this period. Another example that's actually of a female ruler, so that way we can see that both female and male rulers were shown with this new kind of emotion on their faces. This woman, who is a queen, actually is kind of looking upwards, so we can really see her thought process, which is something that you wouldn't have seen before in those previous very stiff figures of the Old Kingdom. Now also in the Middle Kingdom, besides the stone sculptures that they had, wooden sculptures became popular. So they display the same trends with the frontal gaze and the leg outstretched, as we see in this gentleman on the right, but they were simply just made out of a different material, out of wood. And wood would have been imported from Lebanon, and it was simply just a little bit easier to carve and just to get a hold of for sculptors during the period. Now, along with the wooden portraits, we also see wooden models that appear. On the left-hand side, we have a model depicting the counting of livestock, which is an activity that would have happened from time to time in ancient Egypt. And this sort of a model would have probably been placed inside of a tomb. And that way, in the afterlife, this model could come to life, and that way, that activity would also take place in the afterlife for whoever the tomb owner was as well. And then next to that, counting of livestock is a funerary boat, which were also started to become popular in this period of wooden sculpture. The funerary boats, they would have existed so to help the deceased along in the afterlife on their journey across that river into the afterlife. So in the Wooden Kingdom, we see both stone sculpture that has a little hint of emotion, and then also these wooden sculptures and models as well. Now in the New Kingdom, there was a lot of artwork that surfaced about, but I mainly want to talk about these block statues, which were popular in the New Kingdom and also in the Middle Kingdom as well. Actually, these grew in popularity all throughout a lot of Egyptian history, going up into the Saite period in the 26th dynasty. Now this statue on the left is the Chancellor Senmut, who is a chancellor for the pharaoh Hatshepsut, the female leader, and he's shown with Hatshepsut's daughter, Princess Neferura. And the way that we know it's him is just from his head, so his body has actually become just sort of a block. We get the suggestion that his knees are sort of drawn up towards his head, and we see a little indication of his feet there, but it's interesting that the only way we can really identify these figures, their distinguishing features, is by their heads. And now these statues were designed to also, again, be holders for the ka of the deceased. And along the sides, we also see some carving of these sculptures. And so these were probably a little bit easier for the sculptors to carve, so that could have also attributed to their increase in popularity as well. Now in the New Kingdom, painting again appears on the tombs of individuals. Right here we see a painting from the tomb of Nebamun, and this is a fowling scene, which is actually similar to the scene that we have in our tomb in Gallery A as well. So here we see Nebamun fowling, which was another activity of hunting. So just like T was hunting those hippopotami, Nebamun here is shown fowling, so hunting wild birds with his fowling stick, which we see on the right-hand side. Now we again see that composite view of the figure with the torso facing frontal and also his eye facing out towards you, and then the profile, arms and legs and head. And then we also see some attendants are around him, and they're a little bit smaller than he is, so again that hierarchy of scale is present, with whoever owns the tomb would be the largest in the tomb paintings. And he also stands on the water to symbolize that imposing order on nature. Another interesting painting from Nebamun shows a scene with some musicians and some dancers there in the middle. So just kind of a celebratory scene, so that way Nebamun in his afterlife could kind of get a feast, a little way to relax in the afterlife. However, these figures on the left, the women especially, are portrayed in new ways that we're not used to seeing with these pictures that we've seen of rulers. They're seen sitting and also from a full-on frontal view, which is a way that rulers could have never been portrayed. So with these figures, which were of a little bit of lower class with the musicians and the dancers, the artist had a little bit more liberty to portray them in kind of more creative ways. We see some more creative poses in these types of tomb paintings, like those figures in the center over there. They're in some little creative poses with their dancing over there. Now, in this next period, which is actually another part of the New Kingdom, is the Amarna period, where Akhenaten really revolutionized Egyptian culture by changing the religion from a polytheistic one into a monotheistic religion, where Egypt worshipped only one god, who was the Aten. And so with this change in culture comes a really big change in the artwork that we see as well of ancient Egypt. It really changes from that radical, stiff, rigid, idealized style of the Old Kingdom into a much more fluid, very almost personal artwork style. So here we have Akhenaten, and he's shown giving offerings to the rays of the Aten. And as we see, he is a more elongated body, sort of more stylized. He has that elongated chin as well. So we'll see that in a lot more of the sculpture from this period. This piece right here, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their 3 daughters, is a really new look into royal family life. Before, we only saw, as in King Pepi II and his mother, we just kind of saw the figures themselves, but they were idealized and we couldn't really get a good grasp of what their life might have been like. But with sculptures like these in the Amarna period, we get to see King Akhenaten, who's holding one of his daughters, and appears to even be about to give her a kiss. And then next to him, who's actually looking across at him, is his wife Nefertiti. And she holds 2 of their other daughters. And one of them actually seems to be grabbing her headdress, so just like a daughter might kind of play with some earrings today, that's what we see going on here. So it's a little bit more of an intimate scene. It's interesting how these come to life even more than in the Middle Kingdom with that slight emotion. Here we see really good indications of emotion and family life and personality too. And just the fact that the couple is looking directly at each other rather than both facing straight ahead, like